To understand the Nazis' strange interest in animals, we must go back to March 1933. Hitler had been in power for less than 2 months.
Mars 1933, ouverture de Dachau, du camp de concentration de Dachau, et en même temps, bon, les premières lois, les premières discussions en tout cas, qui vont avoir lieu sur la protection des animaux.
In 1933, animal well-being was not the greatest priority in the world. In France and England, abuse in public was punishable by law, but animals were not highly regarded. In Germany, Hitler passed the first law to ban all animal cruelty. Only 80 days after his nomination as Chancellor, the Führer became an animal rights pioneer.
Just is not what you expect, but the Nazi laws of 1933 were the most extensive animal protection laws in the world at the time.
The law of the 21st of April 1933 was so far ahead of its time that many of its articles remained in force until the 1970s. From that moment on, animals had rights in Germany.
The animal itself had a right to be treated in a decent way. That was a watershed moment in animal protection law.
Aux États-Unis, il y avait une société qui, en 1934, a délivré une médaille à Hitler en raison, justement, des lois qui avaient été prises en 1933.
We got hold of the texts of the laws approved by Hitler. They state that making an animal suffer unnecessarily is forbidden. But the texts go much further. Hitler reviews all of the practices that are now prohibited in extreme detail. Article 11, it is forbidden to force-feed poultry. Article 9, it is forbidden to perform operations without anesthesia. Article 5, it is forbidden to abandon your pet. Even more surprising, in a Germany that is modernizing at breakneck speed, vivisection is prohibited, even for medical research. Goering, the regime's second-in-command, appears as the savior of laboratory rabbits and mice. The punishment set out for offenders has a terrible irony.
Goring said in a speech, "I will send to a concentration camp anybody who torments animals in laboratories."
It's tempting to take, I think, a simplistic line and cast the Nazis as the first environmentally conscious group in society. The difficulty comes, of course, in that I don't think you can isolate these measures. They're part of this wider conception of the world, which also had these horribly brutal and cruel aspects.
What's behind this strange obsession with the animal kingdom? Animals and Nazi leaders seem to have very different backstories. However, their destinies were intimately entwined. To understand how, we must delve into the private lives of the Nazis, starting with their leader, Adolf Hitler. The Führer always had a very special relationship with his dogs.
Hitler constantly had himself photographed with dogs. He spread the idea that he was a great trainer of dogs, that he had even a kind of mystical bond with them.
The most famous animal of the Third Reich is Blondie, the Führer's dog. These images of Hitler in private were taken by Eva Braun, who would later become his wife. Here we are in the summer residence of the Reich Chancellor in Berchtesgaden in Bavaria. Hitler's well-known love for his dogs has been widely discussed. Many historians see it as a manifestation of the dictator's solitary and anti-social personality.
He would reportedly risk his life every day to take his dog for a walk.
Il y a une espèce de slogan, c'est les Allemands sont ceux qui aiment naturellement les animaux, sont les amoureux des animaux.
They came to idealize the countryside, the farm, the forest, as areas where true Germanic, Aryan, Nordic people stood in a close organic relationship with the soil, with the landscape, and with animals.
Behind this fantasy of an idealized nature was a much darker aspect. The true German, the Aryan, loved animals, unlike the Jew, who was seen as someone who massacred them. The target was kosher slaughter, a ritual in which the animal is bled. The Jewish tradition, considered to be unbelievably cruel by the Nazis, is forbidden under the law of April 21st, 1933.
The law says kosher butchering is illegal, period. This is one of the many little laws that pushed Jews outside of civil society.
The zoo in Berlin can help us understand the deep relationship the Nazis had with animals. This zoo was unlike any other. It underwent a full transformation when Hitler came to power. Here, typically German animals were honored to assert the supremacy of the Germans. The role of the zoo is even more important because at the time, it was a key place in Germany.
It was the zoo in the world that had the most diverse representation of the animal kingdom, and the Berliners were very proud. I think it's fair to say that the Berlin Zoo was a focal point of society, of the high society.
The zoo was an unmissable place for the upper classes in the 1930s. It also quickly became the privileged venue for the regime's big celebrations.
Already in May 1933, the staff of the zoo would march to the Nazi propaganda May Day celebrations in uniforms. So I could say the zoo was adapting to the new regime very, very quickly.
Today, the zoo confronts its Nazi past by clearly exposing it. At the time, the director of the zoo had a large part in this responsibility. His name was Lutz Heck. He was an ambitious zoologist who supported the Nazis' rise to power. In 1937, he became a member of the party. Later, when he became a member of the SS, he got closer to Hitler. The Nazis rewarded his good and loyal service with these distinctions, and with good reason. On his own initiative, Lutz Heck effectively created a privileged area inside the Berlin Zoo that was dedicated exclusively to German species.
Lutz Heck then put into reality his idea of a place where only so-called German animals were displayed. The problem with the German zoo is that it was from the beginning meant as part of the national propaganda.
In just a few years, the zoo became a powerful propaganda tool for Nazi ideology. It showed hundreds of thousands of German children that the German race was superior, leagues above the rest.
Whether a creature was German or not was more significant than the distinction of species.
It reflected that the Nazis were fond of animals, but only their animals.
Lutz Heck went even further by using German animals to represent Nazism.
Eyewitnesses told us that the cages of the so-called German zoo were marked with a swastika. So by only marking the animals native in one's own country, you do make a statement. You somehow transfer them into patriotic animals.
For the Nazis, not all animals had the same rank or role. The German Shepherd in particular was one of the most patriotic. Hitler and his friends glorified dogs. They even threw huge parties in their honor. The German Shepherd was around long before Hitler, but from its creation, it was destined to become the ultimate Aryan dog.
Der deutsche Schäferhund ist nicht so alt, wie er aussehen soll. Er ist etwas über 100 Jahre alt. Er ist 1899 geschaffen worden, künstlich geschaffen worden, durch einen Züchter, der hieß Max von Stephanitz.
At the end of the 19th century, Max von Stephanitz modified the breeds of sheepdogs to create the perfect dog. Strong, intelligent, tough, and above all, obedient. A fervent nationalist, the breeder modeled it on what he believed to be the virtues of the German people.
Max von Stephanitz Grafrath meinte, den wirklich guten deutschen Hund zu züchten. Mit den deutschen Tugenden. Aggressiv. Ich bin nicht aggressiv. Ich bin also auch nicht deutsch. Aber treu. Und dann vor allen Dingen nach dem Aussehen her meinte er, der deutsche Schäferhund würde so aussehen wie die Hunde der alten Germanen.
The Nazis resurfaced this heritage by putting the German Shepherd in the spotlight. In the new Reich, a full day every year was dedicated to them.
The Nazis did have a Day of the Dog where they tried to recognize and celebrate the dogs and their importance in Germanic culture.
Da wurde eine Parade gemacht mit Hunden und an der Spitze dieser Hunde liefen natürlich die deutschen Schäferhunde. Die deutschen Schäferhunde sind oder sollen die besten Hunde sein.
Bright and obedient, German Shepherds quickly became the Wehrmacht's finest war dog. In 1938, preparing for war, they built the biggest canine training center in Europe in Kummersdorf, in the south of Berlin. There, the German army trained 200,000 military dogs. During the conflict, they were very effective accompanying soldiers on patrol or helping the injured. They also carried supplies, messages, and even carrier pigeons. To shape his new Germany, Hitler doesn't take inspiration from any wild animal. He turns to the dog's ancestor, the wolf.
For the Nazis, the wolf was a totem animal. It was an animal that they identified with a sort of primeval fierceness, but also with a loyalty to the pack, the qualities that they wanted to promote.
Hitler had been obsessed with wolves for a long time. According to the testimonies of those around him, the Führer constantly compared himself to a wolf in both his public and private life. The chief commander of the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, had always liked to be different in the Nazi regime. Goering considered animals to be prey.
He was absolutely passionate about hunting. He was indeed appointed as Reich Jägermeister, the chief hunter of the Reich.
Hitler and Himmler claimed to be disgusted by hunting. The future mastermind of the Final Solution said one day of hunters, "How can you take pleasure in shooting poor innocent animals by surprise while they are peacefully grazing at the edge of a wood? When you look at it, it's murder, pure and simple."